Harvard University's Professor Paul Peterson is offering a new take on education in America. His new book, Teachers versus the Public, co-authored with Michael Henderson, explores the divide between the education policy views of teachers and the public as a whole. The result shows a deep divide between the opinions held by Americans and those who teach in the public school system. And joining us now to discuss his book, Paul Peterson.
Well, Francesca, thank you for inviting me on your show today.
Thank you very much for being here. Paul, I want to ask you, what inspired you to take on this particular subject?
Well, my co-authors and I have been doing representative samples of the American public to get their views on American education now for about 6-7 years. Older versus younger, the homeowners versus non-homeowners, parents versus others, minority groups versus whites, Democrats versus Republicans, and we never find that big a difference on lots of issues. Nothing quite as big as the difference between what teachers think and what the rest of the public thinks.
And Paul, within this research, what would you say is the most interesting information that you've found yourself?
Well, there's a lot of interesting details, but one that's really powerful is the fact that the public thinks that teacher tenure is not where we need to go in the future. They think that if we're going to have tenure, we should evaluate teachers on the basis of student performance in their classrooms, and we probably should get rid of it altogether. And the teachers disagree. Well, 67% of Americans favor this reform. Only 16 to 20% of the teachers like the idea.
So within this deep divide you're saying between teachers and the public, where would you say the gap then is the widest?
Well, the gap is on issues that have to do with teachers' occupational privileges. All groups like to keep their privileges, whether they're bankers or real estate agents or whomever, but we tend to think of the teachers as people who serve our students. They have very high prestige in our society, right up there with nurses and scientists and firefighters. But when it comes to the privileges of the occupation, they want to keep them. They don't want to be held accountable for their performance in the classroom. They don't want to be paid according to how effective a teacher they are.
Paul, as a recovering member of Congress, you can imagine I had a situation out on the stump when education would come up. It's an issue that remains at the forefront of the minds of most Americans. And just anecdotally or observationally, I was lamenting the fact that in the last half century, it seems the profession of teaching has transmogrified in the public schools into essentially a trade union or another bureaucratic union. The issue of unionization, does that increase polarity between public school teachers and public school parents?
Well, it might, because the American public thinks that unions do more harm than good in their local schools, whereas teachers think the opposite. So that's one of the big differences out there. And of course, we didn't have collective bargaining in education before 1965. It's gradually expanded in the years since that time, and it's in full play today. So there's nothing that says that we always must have that, and there's attempts to roll it back in Wisconsin, Indiana, and a few other states. So we don't know what direction it's going to take in the future, but right now there's a difference between what the public wants and what the teacher wants.
Paul, in terms of different states trying to roll some ideas back, what about this whole notion of Common Core state standards? Where do teachers and the public come down on this issue? Because we've seen both sides pretty vocal about this. I know that states like Indiana have rolled back Common Core. Is this an area where teachers and parents and the public can come together?
Well, this could be a changing issue in American education, but the last time we went into the field, which was in 2013, we found that the American public wanted the Common Core. They believe in national standards. They think that students should be held to those standards and should be forced to perform at the high level in order to graduate from high school. And the teachers don't particularly disagree with that issue. They don't support it as much as the parents do, but it's not as deep a divide as on some of the other other issues. Whether that's going to change in 2014 with all the press this issue is now receiving remains to be seen.
Days on Capitol Hill when different school boards and different educators groups would descend upon Washington. There was almost a palpable hostility, certainly amongst members of the teachers union, toward the whole voucher concept. And the irony was, of course, in the District of Columbia, we had an almost embryonic policy to offer tuition tax credits, what some people call vouchers. We tried to change the name, Paul, into opportunity scholarships for middle and low income parents to be able to send their kids to private schools. Is this union line, no vouchers, no way, no how, for no reason, is that continuing to challenge or exacerbate the gulf between teachers and the rest of America?
Yes, that's one of the big differences. The American public, by a substantial margin, wants to extend vouchers to everybody, regardless of income. And teachers are very opposed to that. So that's one of the deepest divides. There's also a big divide over charter schools. So this idea that there should be some competition in education, that there should be some alternatives to what's being provided by the local school district, which has got the collective bargaining arrangement, that's a deep divide.
Paul, I don't know if this is too esoteric, and I don't even know if you could put it into questionnaire form to poll, but let me offer this observation. The formal education on education, in other words, the different schools of education that have developed the teacher training programs, there have been reform movements in the past to say, look, we need to bring real life experts and leaders into the classroom. Teaching certificates are important, but there should not be, for example, a kind of rigidity based on a master's in education or even a bachelor's degree in education. Does the American public want to see more experts, more real world experts coming back into the classroom? And how does that shape up when it comes down to modern thought on the different schools of education and formal teacher training at the university level?
Yeah, some work that I've done shows that certifying a teacher doesn't make that teacher any better. If you compare the ones that are certified with the others that are hired as an emergency teacher or in some other way, we don't see any difference in their performances, and we don't see any value to the master's degree. And the American public sort of understands that, because they think principals should be able to hire the best college graduate out there. Anybody with a college degree should be able to be hired if the principal and the superintendent at the school thinks that's a good idea. The teachers disagree with that. The unions have fought that, and the teachers agree with their union leaders in this regard.
Paul, can I ask, if the Common Core is such a great program, why haven't more states joined, and why have some states dropped out?
Well, of course, a lot of states have joined. I mean, I think the last count I heard was somewhere over 40, and it may have slipped from that as a couple of states have pulled out. I think it's too soon to know exactly how this is going to roll out. In theory, people are saying we should do the same thing, math is math, wherever you are throughout the country. Just how much that's going to impose a common way of teaching math on all school districts is unclear at this point in time. Some people are afraid of that. Other people say, no, it's not going to be imposed by these standards. So I think the public so far has been supporting this idea. And I think it's only a segment of the public, that a very articulate segment, that's been opposing it. But we'll have to see what happens, whether or not the public is going to revise its thinking on this matter.
Paul, we only have about a minute left. I'm just curious where the public comes down on basic skills. A lot of the footage we've seen now has to do with the advent of the computers and having computers in classrooms. But does the public still, by and large, say, hey, let's get the basic stuff, reading, writing, and arithmetic before we move on to anything else?
Well, I think the public is very concerned about the fact that students are not learning any more today than they were 50 years ago, despite the fact that we need much more of a skilled population than ever before, because there is certainly support for more accountability.
Well, Paul Peterson, we very much appreciate your time. And Teachers versus the Public is the name of Paul's book. We think you ought to check it out. It'll offer some enlightenment on the subject of education. Francesca, we appreciate your contributions on this subject, and it's enough to get a guy to want to go back to school. Where do you stand on these issues? Basic skills for education? Has it crystallized now to teachers versus the public? Why don't you weigh in? We'd love for you to tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. We're coming back.